The
What do we
sound
have
of a
here?
distant, shrill scream echoed through the darkened halls of the gated community. The door to the garage stood ajar, revealing the body of Jacob Hart, his decapitated head lying on the cold concrete floor. His lifeless body was twisted in a position that made the blood run cold in the veins of anyone who would see it. The lights in the garage flickered as a police officer approached, his flashlight shining on the horror before him. "What the hell
we have
happened
here?"
here?" the officer whispered, his voice trembling in disbelief. The calm, upscale Lakeside Ridge community, home to retirees and families looking for peace, was shattered that night, and no one had any answers. In the following days, the second body of Evelyn Hart, Jacob's wife of 50 years, was discovered, floating in Lake Haven, her body weighted down with concrete blocks. Her death was as brutal as her husband's, but the discovery only raised more questions than answers. The quiet, seemingly idyllic couple had been brutally murdered. But why? And who could have done such a thing to two people so deeply embedded in the community? The investigation would reveal chilling details, but it would also lead detectives down a dark and twisting path, where every lead seemed to fade and every theory raised more uncertainty. "It's like the killer knew them," Detective Mason Hayes muttered, staring at the crime scene photos. "They were targeted. But why? There was no robbery, no forced entry. Whoever did this knew exactly where to strike." Inside the Lakeside Ridge home, the absence of any struggle was unnerving. Everything was pristine, the jewelry untouched, the electronics still in place, the money never taken. The only evidence of violence was Jacob's body, savagely mutilated, and Evelyn's disappearance, which had now taken a tragic turn. It was as though the killer had wanted to send a message. Mason couldn't stop himself from running through every possible theory. "Maybe it's a professional," he asked himself, leaning back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. The detectives had been on the case for days, piecing together the timeline. They checked Evelyn and Jacob's bank records, only to find that nothing had been touched. No debts, no desperate need for money. So it wasn't a financial motive, he thought. Then the breakthrough came. Weeks into the investigation, as Mason walked into the forensic lab, the words came like a lifeline. "We found something," said Lauren Richards, his partner on the case. She was holding a small vial of evidence, DNA. The breakthrough came in 2024, when they finally found unknown DNA on Jacob's clothing, the first concrete lead since the couple's death. The sample didn't match anyone in their records, offering hope but not answers. Mason studied the DNA report in his hands, his thoughts racing. "This could be it," he said aloud. But deep down, he knew the breakthrough could easily turn into another dead end. The lab had been wrong before, but they couldn't ignore it. The DNA could finally lead them to a suspect. They had to push forward. As the investigation unfolded, more questions arose. What happened in those final moments of Jacob's life? The discovery of gunshot residue on Jacob's collar suggested he'd been shot before his head was removed. Was the killing brutal, or was there something deeper? And the discovery of Evelyn's body in Lake Haven, with concrete blocks tied around her, seemed almost designed to send a message. Mason couldn't shake the thought that these murders weren't random. The sheer brutality, Jacob's decapitation, Evelyn's violent drowning, pointed to something far more personal. "This wasn't just a murder," Mason said to Lauren, flipping through their case files. "This was a message. But from who and why?" The couple had no known enemies. Jacob, 75, had retired years ago from a tech startup and spent his days quietly living with his wife in their lakefront home. Evelyn, 73, was a former teacher, known for volunteering in local community events. They were the epitome of the quiet retiree, hardly a target for any kind of violence. As the days turned to weeks, the community was rocked by grief and fear. The police questioned friends and family, hoping for a lead, but no one could come up with anything concrete. Jacob's business dealings, though successful, hadn't been contentious enough to make enemies. They were just two ordinary people, leading an ordinary life in the most tranquil of settings. Mason's thoughts kept circling back to one thing. Who would want to kill this couple? Theories ranged from old business rivals to dangerous witnesses. Perhaps the couple had seen something they shouldn't have, something that put them directly in harm's way. On the other side of town, Sarah, the Hart's daughter, was desperate for answers. In a conversation with her brother Michael, she revealed some troubling things. "I've gone over everything in my head," Sarah said, the exhaustion in her voice evident. "I know my parents. They weren't involved in anything dangerous. But what if we missed something? What if they were in over their heads and we didn't even know it?" Michael didn't have an answer, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing from the investigation. "The more I think about it, the more I feel like there's a bigger picture. We don't know what happened in the days leading up to their deaths. What did they see? What did they know?" It was in 2024, nearly a decade after the murders, that the breakthrough DNA evidence would offer a glimmer of hope. When Daniel Calloway, a man with a violent criminal history, became the prime suspect, the police thought they had finally found the link. Calloway had been in the area at the time of the murders, and his criminal connections to shady figures who might have held grudges against Jacob made him a promising lead. But when police brought Daniel in for questioning, his reaction was unnerving. He denied any involvement. "I don't know anything about them," he said, his voice calm, almost too calm. "I've never even met them." Despite his protestations, the evidence pointed toward him. But no matter how hard they pushed, Calloway remained silent, denying any connection to the crime. As Mason and Lauren questioned him further, the weight of the case bore down on them. "I know you're lying," Mason thought, but they had no hard evidence to connect him directly to the murders. Why was it so easy for them to just get away with it? Lauren asked one night, her voice weary. "What if we're looking in the wrong direction? What if the killer isn't who we think it is?" Mason leaned back, frustration clouding his judgment. "We're close, Lauren. We have DNA, and that's more than we had last year. We can't give up now." Days turned to weeks, and the investigation into the deaths of Evelyn and Jacob Hart seemed to stall once again. The breakthrough DNA evidence had given detectives a sliver of hope, but now, after questioning Daniel Calloway for hours, they were left with even more frustration. He had denied any involvement, and though his criminal connections were suspicious, they had nothing concrete to charge him with. The case felt like a dead end. Mason had gone over every possible lead, every theory, and every piece of evidence, but it was as if the killer had vanished into thin air. There were still no witnesses, no suspects beyond Calloway, and no motive that made any sense. At the same time, the Hart family continued to grapple with their grief and confusion. Sarah Hart had spent weeks trying to reconcile the parents she had known with the tragic, violent deaths they had suffered. Every new lead or theory was just another reminder that she had no real answers. "We'll never know why," Sarah whispered to her brother Michael one evening. They sat in their parents' empty house, the quiet around them suffocating. "Maybe we're not supposed to. Maybe some things just don't have an explanation." Michael shook his head, a deep frown on his face. "No, we can't give up. Someone knows something, Sarah. We just have to find it." He clutched a photo of their parents from years ago, when they were smiling and happy, full of life. The contrast between that image and the brutal murders they had suffered was too much to bear. Meanwhile, Mason sat alone in his office, staring at the file in front of him. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something vital. "What aren't we seeing?" he muttered under his breath. He ran through every detail of the crime scene again, hoping something would click. He pulled up the old photographs of Jacob's decapitated body and studied the garage. No blood. It didn't make sense. How could someone decapitate another person in a confined space like that? And yet, there was no trace of blood splatter. Mason thought back to the forensic evidence. Gunshot residue on Jacob's collar. The fact that he was shot before his decapitation meant the attack wasn't random. But why decapitate him? Was the killer sending a message? Then, his eyes landed on the photo of Evelyn's body found in Lake Haven. The body had been weighted down with concrete blocks, yet it was floating near the shore when it was discovered. It didn't add up. Why not just dump her body in the lake without any extra weight? Was it a signal to someone? Was this personal? With no progress from Calloway, Mason and his team began to look deeper into the Hart family's past. Maybe they had missed something. A call came in from a former business associate of Jacob, a man named Gary Holt, who claimed to have been involved in a business venture with him years before. Holt had been known for being a bit of a wild card in the tech industry, and some had speculated that he might have had grudges against Jacob. "We need to talk to him," Mason said to Lauren as they stood in front of the building where Gary Holt worked. They had spent weeks chasing down old business leads, but this was the first time they felt like they were heading in the right direction. "If he has a connection to Jacob, it could be our break." They made their way into the office building, where Holt sat behind a large desk, his sharp eyes narrowing as they approached. He was older now, but his demeanor remained cold and calculating. "What do you want?" Holt asked, not bothering to get up from his chair. "If this is about business, I don't owe Jacob anything." "It's about something much worse than business," Lauren replied. "We're investigating the murders of Jacob and Evelyn Hart. I think you might know more than you're letting on." Holt didn't flinch, but Mason could see the slight tension in his shoulders. He was hiding something. "I don't know anything about that," he said, trying to sound indifferent. "I haven't seen Jacob in years. We parted ways long before his death." "So you're saying you have no idea why someone would want to kill him? Or his wife?" Mason pressed, his voice sharp. Gary Holt looked down at the desk, his fingers tapping nervously. "I'm not the one to ask about that," he said, voice lowering. "But if you're looking for a reason, Jacob had enemies. He was involved in some bad deals, some shady people. I'm just saying, maybe that's where you should look." Later that day, the team dove into Jacob's old business dealings. They uncovered a string of failed ventures, and some of the people Jacob had crossed were not the kind of people anyone wanted to anger. But there was no direct link to a murder, no concrete proof that any of these business rivals had anything to do with the deaths of the Harts. Mason sat in his office that night, exhaustion creeping in. The case felt like it was slipping through his fingers. "What am I missing?" he muttered, staring at the board full of connections and suspects. The walls were lined with evidence, yet none of it pointed to the killer. Then an idea sparked in his mind. He had been so focused on the possible business angle that he hadn't considered another possibility. The lake. What if the killer wasn't just familiar with the area, but also knew the couple's routine? What if they had been on their boat? It wasn't far from the lake where Evelyn's body had been found. The boat would have provided easy access to the water, and it could explain why her body was weighted down. Determined to follow up, Mason called Lauren and they drove to the lakefront docks the next morning. "Jacob and Evelyn spent a lot of time on their boat," Mason said, looking at the empty dock where their boat had been tied up. What if the killer knew the couple's routine? What if they planned the murder to happen on the water? They found evidence that Jacob's boat had been docked nearby in the days leading up to the murders. But the key was in the concrete blocks, a detail that wasn't just random. This was personal. The killer wanted to make sure Evelyn couldn't escape. As they pieced together the final moments of Evelyn and Jacob's lives, the DNA from Daniel Calloway remained the most promising lead, though it didn't match anyone they knew. For now, the killer's identity was still a mystery. Yet there was a glimmer of hope that the case would be solved soon. The evidence was mounting, but so were the unanswered questions. The deeper they dug into Jacob's past, the more they realized the world the Harts had lived in wasn't as pristine as it appeared. The couple's peaceful life, once seen as a quiet retirement, was anything but ordinary. Business deals, rivalries, and long-held grudges. All of these seemed to intertwine, creating a dark undercurrent beneath the surface of the couple's death. If you're intrigued by this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next twist in the investigation. If you think you know what happened or have your own theories, comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you found this video compelling, don't forget to like and share it with others who might be hooked on true crime mysteries. Your support helps us bring more stories like this one to light.